And one additional reason I want to note for why the experiences and the outcomes for people who are part of marginalized communities are often different is because of unawareness. When you are unaware of the plight and the experiences and the differences in the outcomes that people from underrepresented and underserved communities experience, then it doesn't even register in your radar of what types of things from an equity standpoint you could be or should be doing to level the playing field so that those outcomes can be more consistent for all the people that you serve. Welcome to Inclusion and Marketing, the show that's all about helping you uncover the skills and insights you need to win the attention, adoration, and loyalty of more consumers and talent. I'm your host, Sonia Thompson, an inclusive marketing coach, strategist, and someone with a lot of differences. Let's get to it. I recently listened to a new podcast I heard about, and then I immediately listened to the next episode. Ben Shapiro, host of the MarTech podcast, had me hooked. The show is made up of interviews with marketers who use technology to generate growth and achieve success. And let's face it, aren't just about all of us using technology to do that these days? Because Ben talks to a broad range of guests, you're sure to find a show that covers a type of marketing technology that could really make a difference within your business, such as digital assistants, email marketing, or even dynamic live. As a result, you might find yourself doing a little binge of this show the same way I did. Listen to MarTech wherever you get your podcasts. All right, before we get into this episode, I want to just give you a quick heads up that we are going to be covering some tough topics, including maternal mortality. So if this is going to put you into a weird or not so good place, definitely skip to the second half of this episode or skip it altogether. I want to make sure that you keep your mind right. When I was pregnant with Luna, Jonathan and I were living in Argentina. So basically for my entire pregnancy and for her delivery, all of that happened in Buenos Aires. Now for me, pregnancy was a blissful time, but still, even with that, throughout pregnancy, there were a number of emotions that I had to manage. And because of that, there were certain data points and sources that I often had to make sure that I limited my intake of. One of those things was maternal mortality rates. And you might think of, hey Sonia, why are you thinking about maternal mortality while you're pregnant? But unfortunately, as a Black woman, those pretty horrific data points were something that I was very much aware of. According to the CDC, in the US in 2020, for women overall, there were 23.8 maternal deaths for every 100,000 live births. But when you zero in on this number by demographic, there's a clear outlier in the data. When you look at the maternal mortality rate for Black women, it's nearly double that of the national average, at 55.3 deaths for every 100,000 live births. Now, the US already has a very high maternal mortality rate, especially whenever you start comparing it to other countries that have high incomes. One data report showed that while the US sits at 23.8 deaths per 100,000 live births, the 12 other countries that they compared them to, including the UK, Canada, France, South Korea, Netherlands, and Japan, ranged from 1.2 to 13.6. As mentioned, the numbers in the US are quite high in general, but the numbers are just plain alarming whenever you look at it for Black women in the US. For my own personal situation, I was extremely thankful to be giving birth to Luna in Argentina. My entire care experience from start to finish was an absolute dream, even though we had to make a few adjustments that last month because the pandemic hit. But this isn't a case where I want to say, hey, I was okay, so let me not pay attention to a glaring issue that impacts so many other lives. That's how problems persist. I bring this topic up on this show today because as marketers and business leaders, the experiences of people who are part of marginalized communities are often very different from the experiences of the masses. In a lot of those instances, the discrepancies in the experience aren't really talked about. But if we looked at the data, we'll see a very different and very clear story. In the US, for instance, we definitely know that there are differences in the quality of care and outcomes that exist based upon race. And there's plenty of data to support that. One 2016 study, and here's the actual title of it, Racial Bias in Pain Assessment and Treatment Recommendations, and false beliefs about biological differences between blacks and whites. Now, this study was published in Psychological and Cognitive Sciences. The research showed that half of medical students believed that there were biological differences between black people and white people, and those beliefs impacted how they were actually treating their patients. Here's the abstract of the study. Now, it's a bit medical, so stick with me here. It's important. Black Americans are systematically undertreated for pain relative to white Americans. We examine whether this racial bias is related to false beliefs about biological differences between blacks and whites. For example, black people's skin is thicker than white people's skin. Study 1 documented these beliefs among white laypersons and revealed that participants who more strongly endorsed false beliefs about biological differences reported lower pain ratings for a black versus white target. Study 2 extended these findings to the medical context and found that half of a sample of white medical students and residents endorsed these beliefs. Moreover, participants who endorsed these beliefs rated the black versus white patient's pain as lower and made less accurate treatment recommendations. Participants who did not endorse these beliefs rated the black versus white patient's pain as higher, but showed no bias in treatment. These findings suggest that individuals with at least some medical training hold and may use false beliefs about biological differences between blacks and whites to inform medical judgments, which may contribute to racial disparities in pain assessment and treatment. To be clear, there should be no race-based disparities in treatments, outcomes, or experience within healthcare. Here's what one nurse I talked to on the topic had to say.
I'm just trying to think of a disease where the race matters. For the majority of the things, majority of the disease processes or whatever, when a patient comes in, their race has nothing to do with what's happening. If you twisted your ankle, what does you being black have to do with your ankle being broken? Nothing. But as far as medicine and healthcare and how we treat people, it should not be at the forefront at all.
Now, as I mentioned, race should not impact outcomes or treatment in healthcare, but the data shows that it actually does. This discrepancy in outcomes isn't just limited to the realm of healthcare. In 2021, beauty retailer Sephora published the results of a large-scale research study that they had commissioned entitled The Racial Bias in Retail Study. I'll link it up in the show notes in case you're interested in digging into the full 17-page report. It's super well done and it's quite fascinating. In the study, which was industry-wide from a retail standpoint, they found that 3 in 5 retail shoppers have experienced discriminatory treatment, 2 in 5 have personally experienced unfair treatment on the basis of their race or skin color, and 3 in 5 retail employees have actually witnessed bias at their place of work. Now, this bias doesn't just impact consumers, it extends to retail employees as well. The study showed that 1 in 3 retail employees have contemplated quitting when they experience racial bias and unfair treatment. Now, in response to the report, Jean-Andre Rougeau, CEO and president of Sephora Americas, reiterated that diversity, equity, and inclusion are core parts of their mission and values. He also acknowledged that racial bias was at the core of many negative customer experiences by diverse shoppers. I found this quote from him particularly important. But the reality is that the retail experience is not always inclusive to all. The very real issue of underlying racial bias remains a barrier to ensuring that all of our clients enjoy the sense of belonging we strive to foster. So we know there's race-based disparities in outcomes in healthcare, and we also know that there are race-based disparities in experiences in the retail environment. But there are also race-based and gender-based disparities in outcomes in venture capital. A 2022 report by nonprofit firm Diversity VC showed that only 1.87% of $31 billion worth of venture capital funds had been allocated to startups with diverse leaders. Sarah Miller, Chief Operating Officer at Diversity VC, talked about the findings of the report and noted this. What we found was that VC-backed startups were still disproportionately men, 89.3%, white, 71.6%, based in Silicon Valley, 35.3%, and Ivy League educated, 13.7%. She also noted that the data had hardly changed in 2 years. This comparison to 2 years prior is a nod to everything that happened in summer 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, when a number of companies across all industries, including those in the venture capital, pledged that they would do better with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Race-based and gender-based disparities are rampant, and these are in areas where we have actual data. But what about the disparities that exist in other industries that still impact a lot of people, even though we might not have the data to show it? This happens at the consumer level, it happens at the employee level, and it happens even at the provider level whenever we think about the people who are offering the products, services, and experiences, the entrepreneurs, the business leaders. A while back, I chatted with Megan Williams, who heads the Black Freelance online community. She told me that one of the reasons why she started Black Freelance was to get answers to common questions that she was hearing and having herself that weren't found in more mainstream spaces.
When I first started freelancing, you're out there, you're learning about things, and I started running into just some general questions. Like, one of the things that you will hear a lot of just mainstream freelancers advise people is to post your picture online. So I started doing that, and I noticed that in a couple, and maybe actually two specific situations, we were having really good back and forth. People seemed excited, and I saw them check my LinkedIn, and all of a sudden they disappeared. And my LinkedIn didn't say anything different than my website. So, that question is in my head. It's like, is this because I'm Black? And it might not have been, I didn't know. But what it made me realize is that I had no one to go to ask that kind of question. It made me realize not only that there was a need for a site for Black freelancers, but that people's actually, it made me realize that. But then as I started to build the site and started listening to more people's freelance stories, and that's any freelancer, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic, whatever, I started to notice how their businesses were shaped by their networks and the cultural experiences they were having.
Okay.
And if you realize that people's freelance experience are not, culturally neutral, everyone's experience is shaped by something bigger than themselves. Okay. So that, we needed to start paying attention, or like I wanted to start paying attention to, how Black freelancers' careers are shaped by their cultural experiences.
And in the world of entrepreneurship, there are plenty of unconscious biases that many Black people, as well as other people from marginalized and underrepresented communities, have to deal with on a regular basis that their peers and counterparts who are part of the dominant group do not have to experience. Popular business coach Jerisha Hawk went into a lot of detail about this and her personal experiences with it in a reel she published on Instagram. I'll link to it in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. All right, we'll get to why so many experiences are different for people from marginalized communities right after this short break. The other day, I watched a frustrating customer experience unfold. Jonathan, my husband, was calling the cell phone company. He pressed the button to talk to someone in Spanish, and the phone system then switched over to Spanish, which it should have, only to have a live person come on the line in English. Ugh. Whenever you can, it is good practice to avoid friction in the customer journey. It really helps in delivering experiences that make more of your customers, including those who are often underrepresented and underserved, feel like they belong. Sometimes doing that is easier said than done. But with HubSpot, it actually is easy. That's why more companies are choosing HubSpot CRM, a platform that brings your marketing, sales, and service teams together all in one place. It seamlessly connects your teams. Sales, marketing, customer service, and ops have a complete view of the customer journey. With real-time data at their fingertips, your teams won't trip over each other, and you'll be equipped to deliver better customer experiences, which leads to more customers. Ditch the friction in your customer experience. Learn how HubSpot CRM can help your business grow better at HubSpot.com. All right, let's talk about why so many experiences across industries are different for people from marginalized communities. I've already alluded to several of them, but let's go ahead and call them out specifically. First up is privilege. We all have some degree of privilege, and I'm definitely not saying that privilege is a bad thing. However, we do need to get better acknowledging that privilege does exist and noting the impact that privilege has on people's success, the time it takes to get there, and the resources that are required. Using the venture capital example, a man who went to an Ivy League college has baked in privileges that increase his likelihood of achieving funding for his startup than a woman or even a woman of color who also went to an Ivy League university. You've got to start acknowledging privilege and the role it plays in the outcomes that the people you serve achieve. Another factor that's at play is bias, both conscious and unconscious. Now, using healthcare as an example, if medical professionals believe that Black patients have a higher tolerance for pain, then the data shows that they are going to undertreat them for pain, which of course influences negatively their outcome. I included conscious bias here because even though I want to believe in the good of everyone and that nobody would intentionally do anything to harm another person, I also don't want to be so naive as to think that people aren't aware of the biases that they have. And then sometimes those same people will lean into acting in accordance with those beliefs. Another reason why disparities exist in both the treatment, experiences, and success rates of people from underrepresented and underserved communities in comparison to dominant groups is because of negative stereotypes. Now, let's say there's a negative stereotype out there that Black people are lazy. And I'm not just pulling this one out of the air. This one actually exists. I'm going to drop a link to an academic paper that discusses this stereotype, where it originated, how it has been perpetuated for generations, in the show notes. So if you held the belief or the negative stereotype that Black people were lazy, and then you found out that someone that you were considering hiring is Black, that belief can cause you to either decide not to work with them, perhaps to try to pay them lower than what you were intending to pay someone else, or it can even cause you to have them jump through additional hoops to be able to get the job that other people don't have to go through. And one additional reason I want to note for why the experiences and the outcomes for people who are part of marginalized communities are often different is because of unawareness. When you are unaware of the plight and the experiences and the differences in the outcomes that people from underrepresented and underserved communities experience, then it doesn't even register in your radar of what types of things from an equity standpoint you could be or should be doing to level the playing field so that those outcomes can be more consistent for all the people that you serve. Now, I walked through a number of different examples in various industries of where disparities exist, and we really just cannot assume that these disparities don't exist within our own industries or even our own brands that we work on. That's why it is essential that you become aware of the disparities that exist for people for underrepresented and underserved communities, particularly within your industry and your brand. Why? Because whenever you know that certain groups receive different outcomes, then you can work to put products, services, experiences, processes, systems in place that help to level the playing field so that everyone can achieve the same types of outcomes that directly address those problems for the brand that you work on. I worked with one client a while back who was looking at the data that was showing that the Black community in particular had higher incidence of complications associated with COVID, and they were getting vaccinated at lower rates than other communities. So they worked to implement programming specifically focused on the Black community that helped them improve their COVID-related outcomes and stay healthy. In addition, as you're working to improve the outcomes and level the playing field of what's happening in your own brand and business, you can also expand your efforts to your industry at large. For instance, I was a part of Shine Bootcamp for some years, first as a participant and then as a coach. Shine was all about closing the gender disparity that existed on conference stages. There were just not enough women who were speaking and headlining and keynoting conferences, whether those were in person or virtual. So they created a comprehensive program designed to equip more women as speakers. Now, other companies who wanted to support that mission didn't have to go out and create their own programs. They could simply join forces with the Shine team by sponsoring, funding, and supporting their work. You can do something similar. You don't always have to be the one spearheading something within your industry to make positive change. You can advance the cause by supporting others who are already on the ground and in the trenches doing the work. Okay, so I hope you know by now that just because you create products, services, and experiences with the intent of the people who are using and engaging with them will achieve the degree of success that you've designed for them, there are plenty of other factors that are at play that have nothing to do with your product, services, or experiences that must be considered, particularly when you're talking about people from marginalized communities. Now, because you're watching this show, I'll bet you're not going to be someone who says, hey, that's too bad for them, and then just keep it moving. You're more interested in creating solutions for these types of challenges that exist. So how do you go about doing this? How do you go about changing the outcomes for the better? The first step is identifying how the journeys related to your brand differ based upon the various identities of the people that you serve. And once you have an awareness of those differences, it'll become clear of how you can address them in both the journeys and outcomes. To help you with that, I'm hosting a live workshop on Friday, February 24th, 2023 at 12 p.m. Eastern. It's called How to Build Experiences That Make Underrepresented and Underserved Consumers and Talent Feel Like They Belong. If you can't make it live, no worries. Go ahead and get registered and I'll send you the replay afterwards. You can register at listentothem.co. There you'll also find the Listen to Them 7-episode special podcast series I recently released. That's episodes 38 through 44 in the Inclusion and Marketing podcast feed. You can listen to them wherever you listen to podcasts. In those episodes, you'll hear directly from Black talent and consumers about their experiences at work and as consumers. It's a great primer for the workshop that I mentioned, and it underscores so much of what I covered today in this episode. That's it for today's episode. Remember to go to listentothem.co to get registered for the workshop, and that will enable you to take the next steps forward to get started applying the concepts we talked about in today's show. Until next time, remember, everyone deserves to have a place where they belong. Let's use our individual and collective power to ensure more people feel like they do. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you soon.